Thank you for being here when you have so many other options. Now, let's begin.
As Iceberg made his way down the hall on a makeshift IV crutch, Dr. Gears was limping next to him. Most of the security teams and cleaning crews had already passed, so they had the corridor to themselves. This was probably for the best, as neither were very sturdy. Iceberg had his hand clasped over his chest and was wheezing every few steps, his tattered clothes stained with blood. Gears stood straighter, but leaned sharply to the right with each step. A slow, steady stream of blood oozed from a wound on his torn, parched left thigh. Two burned, broken, bleeding men stumbled and staggered down an empty corridor towards the infirmary, leaving small stains of blood and burnt material in their wake. The officer on the security cameras of that area gave almost no warning and only recorded the phrase, "Doctors passed, injured." Practical testing for possible military decommissioning via thermal and HE materials, the request form read. Doctor, the iceberg bombs things. Explosives, triple surveillance reports, and chocolates were his three great passions. This shouldn't have been such a bad idea. Things were going well when conventional explosives were still being used, but Dr. Things quickly started going less well when Iceberg started using home brewing devices. Several explosions were powerful enough to prompt complaints from site safety, and the second-to-last device caused extensive damage to the exterior walls of the test chamber. But like throwing a football next to a breakable vase at home, blowing things up is a fun game until it's played last. The final shot was an item labeled "slow bomb" in the test manifest. At first it seemed like a flop. The wire-wrapped cube slid harmlessly to a halt at the far end of the room. As the two men watched from what they thought was a safe spot, the device slowly began to deform, then break apart, revealing an incandescent mass of boiling plasma inside its structure. It expanded like a flower opening in a dream, moving an inch every 10 or 20 seconds in a slow-motion explosion. Iceberg's manic grin began to fade as the rapidly swelling wall of flame began to cross the safe beyond this point line. The next time period was uncertain for both men. Dr. Gears could remember some more details, but most of them were flames, alarms, men wearing hazmat suits, and the strong smell of roasting pork. Both were referred for triage, able to walk, and then sent to the infirmary on their own. The walk of shame was a very different thing within the Foundation, and Iceberg was especially pleased that the hall was empty. Gears was as listless as ever, and, other than bodily damage and a limp, appeared virtually unchanged since entering the testing chamber. As they approached the infirmary, Iceberg wondered for the 1,000th time if he really was some kind of robot. The infirmary admitted them with minimal notice, as they were dealing with the after effects of a light-emitting bulb that, when turned on, caused most bones to begin to liquefy and come out of sweat glands. Neither of the two doctors was extremely injured by Foundation standards, so they quickly found themselves in hospital beds and all but forgotten as the team tried to deal with newer and unfamiliar injuries. Dr. Iceberg points to the cool gel patch covering the bad burn on his right arm. He looked at Gears. His leg, as indifferent as ever, was wrapped and elevated in a soft cast. She had several small pieces of gauze in various shades of red, pink, and black on her face, neck, and arms. Iceberg started a little, felt something slightly broken move in his chest, and Doctor. He nodded to Gears. Sorry about that again. I honestly didn't expect this to get out of control. Gears nodded slightly, still staring at the ceiling. There's no need. It happened by mistake. Iceberg leaned back with a sigh as the painkillers began to lull him into a deep, dreamless rest. He awoke with a groaning sound. He shook his head carefully to clear it, and when he returned, Doctor, he saw Gears tapping the screen of the tablet laptop with his stylus. He seemed oblivious to Iceberg, or at least uncaring, so Iceberg decided to try what it would be like to sit. The first stretch of his abdomen spread like a comet of pain stabbing his chest, so he immediately decided to postpone all tests and fell back with a groan. Gears finished, carefully placed the computer on the side table, and nodded to Iceberg. You were asleep while changing your packages. You won't be able to move seriously for 2 days. I won't be able to walk for 4 days, and we'll have to reassign our schedules to others. And a friendship with a man who has been accused of being a robot multiple times, rarely as a joke. Pleasant. He spent a while daydreaming, mentally unraveling the slow bomb's quirks, until he began to feel restless again. He turned back to Gears and watched as he stared at the ceiling, arms crossed, breathing evenly. Hey Gears, are you awake? He asked, hoping he wasn't sleeping with his eyes open again. He knew it was a trick that could be learned, but with Gears, it was too scary. The tall, thin man slowly turned his head to look at the iceberg. His face was almost motionless, except for his mouth. Yes, Dr. Iceberg, I am. Why? Now faced with the old man's full attention, Iceberg felt strangely uncomfortable and unprepared, as if he had been suddenly called upon to answer a question while daydreaming. Well, I was wondering, why do Kane, Agent Fritz, and that fat janitor always call you Cog? Dr. Gears stared for a few moments, blinking slowly. Your last name isn't Dr. Iceberg, is it? Iceberg blinked, caught off guard before stammering. Yeah, so no. Or so yeah, that's not my last name. Gears nodded, making a small sign with his hand. It is an alternative identification assigned by site security. Policy on this issue is in a state of almost constant flux, both due to changes in administrative staff and planned security cycles. Most identifications are chosen randomly, and some follow a specific assignment protocol. Some also seem to have been chosen as a form of joke or inside joke, but this wasn't always the case. He stopped, took a breath, and Iceberg fell completely silent. This was the longest conversation Gears had ever had with Iceberg. That wasn't about business or survival, and he didn't want to break the spell. At the time I was recruited, security protocols were still derived from old military names and acronyms. My first name was COG, derived from my initials. It was later determined that this was too much of a security weakness, most likely due to my extensive work on SCP-882 and its similarity to my previous assignment. My assignment has been changed to Gears. Iceberg sat down and processed for a while before speaking. Wait, so, COG are your initials. So what is your real name? Gears blinked slowly a few times, still watching Iceberg, and the young man knew there would be no response. Hoping to learn more, he changed tactics, the exercise taking his mind off the pulsing pain in his side. Okay, so, Gears, honestly, are you a robot? Or like a Vulcan or something? You have to admit that it's really, not normal. Dr. Gears leaned back with his hands on his chest. Iceberg expected silence, or his methodical, mechanical, I'm not a robot answer that doesn't really do anything to help. Instead, Gears took a slow breath and explained, my mental characteristics are somewhat muted compared to the various coping mechanisms developed by other staff. However, I can understand that mine are particularly striking. No, I am not a robot or some other form of altered human or non-human. He paused and blinked a few times before continuing. I just adapted very well. Iceberg watched the old man lying in the hospital bed, confused. He could almost swear Gears looked conflicted, even depressed. He was just about to ask when Dr. Gears started working again. I am not an emotionless robot. I am feeling. I feel the pain and sadness of losing a friend. I feel joy when I achieve a positive goal and regret when I fall short. I feel fear, even terror, when I encounter things that could cause great harm or worse. It's not that I don't feel it. I can't answer that. Much like the feeling you get when taking strong narcotic painkillers. I'm aware of my feelings and what I'm supposed to do with them, but they feel distant, detached. It's like seeing someone cry and feeling a slight empathy for their situation, but not bursting into tears. Iceberg sat a little stunned. His damn imagination ran out almost immediately, trying to imagine getting through everything he was already struggling with. But this time he couldn't react, feeling all the pain, joy, and fear, but being locked in with them like a madman in a rubber room. It was observed, recorded, then forgotten. Iceberg shivered, unable to look directly at Gears for a while. When he finally looked back, he saw Gears still staring at him, and Iceberg had to suppress another involuntary shudder. He was about to ask another question when a nurse walked in and took him for some blood tests. He was also informed that an oversight committee would review the explosives investigation at the end of the month. When he returned, Dr. Gears was already asleep. The next day, Iceberg woke up late and was able to move with little blinding pain. The bed next to him was empty, and Iceberg looked at it thoughtfully. Since being hired by the Foundation, he had just graduated from college. He had been working almost constantly with Doctor. It was paired with Gears. He was very scared at first. Most new hires reacted with varying degrees of fear, dismay, and pity when he told them about his new role. This did nothing to help his already limited confidence. What's more, it took him months to realize that Gears didn't actually hate him, but that it was his default setting of absolute indifference. Worse still, they kept getting assigned to the worst jobs. He still shuddered when he thought about his first encounter with the SCP-882 breach. Still, even after all this time, Doctor, he knew next to nothing about Gears. Many of the other staff were quite vocal about who they used to be, and some were even allowed a semi-normal life off-site. But Gears was a black box. No idle talk about the past, no hidden tokens or photos on the table. He had checked. No, nothing actually. He never leaves the site other than Foundation work, never takes permission, and does not engage in any non-business activities unless necessary. Even stranger was that no one knew anything about him. Even the classic busybodies on the site had no idea who he was. And Doctor, when asked about Gears, the database turned into a massive, password-covered tower of doom. A sharp knock on the door quickly brought Iceberg back to reality. Gears was limping slightly as he moved towards the bed, reaching down and adjusting the bandage next to him. He was talking to the ceiling, making no gesture or glance to find the man he was addressing. I'm being released early. You'll have to stay here another day, but I expect you to be ready to resume your duties as soon as you're released. Iceberg sighed, shook his head, and looked away. After a long moment of silence, Iceberg turned and looked at Gears and asked, "What happened to you?" said. "So, what the hell, man? You're fucking Spock, but you lack those little human emotions. Did they experiment on you? Did you have a nervous breakdown? What's going on?" As Gears stared at him, Iceberg realized that what he had just said could amounted to insubordination or unauthorized security clearance, to the level where big men with guns was the most comforting part of disciplinary action. The two men stared for what seemed a long time, Iceberg almost unwilling to blink, feeling a fear equivalent to examining SCP-173's security tapes. After a while, Gears blinked slowly and nodded. What happened? I've been asked this many times, and I know many more theories to that effect. What happened was not unique. There is nothing that is impossible to repeat, or that has not happened to others. It is easy to assume that there was a single, defining moment in the transition to my current state, but I believe this is the case. I don't believe it. It's gradual. It's like a disease. After a while, you wake up. It's different. Iceberg nodded, processing this new information. Okay, so I guess you refused. God, I mean, how could something like this happen? You still haven't said what really happened. What started this? He fell silent as Gears turned to look at the young man again. Are you loyal to the trust, Dr. Iceberg? I assume you will respond positively, but think before you respond. I am loyal, but not out of a sense of duty or entitlement. I completely believe in the work done here. Without the foundation, I believe humanity as we know it would fall apart in a very short time. I believe that those of us, the few who have the resources and means to do so, have a direct obligation to insulate others from everything we have. The door to the room opened with a small, poorly lubricated, annoying squeak that Iceberg never noticed. A young doctor comes in and asks Dr. Even as he began reading the discharge information as per Gear's general instruction. Iceberg still heard very little. Disturbing ideas float around, unpleasant memories of tests ordered and observed, instances where the good of the many overwhelms normal human morality, moments when he knew he should actually be turned away, or scared, or at least uneasy, but felt only mild interest at best. Gears escaped the increasingly stormy seas of his mind as he began to leave his hospital bed with the help of the doctor's arm. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Dr. Gears turned slightly and spoke to Iceberg over his shoulder. There was that strange tone in his voice again. As for your request regarding our future work, you may find the literature I mentioned enlightening. There is also an inscription in Tasmania, Australia, that may be useful as a motto or guide stone. I expect you to report for new duties as soon as you are discharged. The young medical doctor looked at the other two, a little confused and wary, but continued to help Gears out of the room. Within seconds, Iceberg was left alone, both uneasy and confused. It wasn't until a few days later that Iceberg had the chance to examine and investigate the highly cryptic message. Gears had never mentioned anything further than what he had said at the hospital, and Iceberg found himself bogged down with paperwork and testing alone. He had barely spoken to or seen anyone in almost 2 days, and finally decided that a little research might ease his distress. It only took a little prodding to find what he was looking for, but it took more time to process. As you are now, so was I once. Soon you will be too. Prepare yourself to follow me. Iceberg sat alone in the deepest reaches of the underground, surrounded by neatly written records of horrors and atrocities, trying very hard not to get cold.